Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 311 with Taran Lent. This is our premiere episode of 2026. Excited to get back to it here after a little winter break. So excited for another amazing year filled with great episodes and getting some great events lined up as well for some live episodes recorded in person, which is always a treat for me to get to network and then bring that content recorded in person to you all. So looking forward to that. Just keep an eye out on LinkedIn for more announcements on that. But for this episode, Taran Lent returns to the show. He's now CTO of Transact CBORD, soon to be Illumia. They are going through a rebrand. We'll talk a little bit about that in this episode and a little bit more in depth into his perspectives on digital transformation that is impacting institutions right now. We use the recently released Higher Ed Innovation Index from Transact to kind of anchor our conversation, but do really appreciate you listening to this amazing episode, premiere episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 311 with Taran Lent. It's always great to have a return guest to the podcast. We always try to kind of cover as much ground as we can, but oftentimes it's just great to bring someone back that was a great guest to continue the conversation and keep talking about maybe what has changed since the last time, but just kind of digging back in with all the things happening in higher ed right now. We're recording this in December of 2025. Taran, I talked with you back in March. Folks kind of caught the episode that I recorded on site at Transact 360. It was great to be there and talk to you and a lot of your colleagues and some customers and partners and all that sort of stuff. So we're excited to have you back. I know you've got a new title as of last time that we spoke. So if you want to just briefly reintroduce yourself to our audience here, and then we'll get to the rest of our conversation, kind of talking about the waves of digital transformation as you're seeing them. So kick us off with your introduction, if you would.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. It's great to see you again. I appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed our first conversation back at our annual client conference. I'm glad I've graduated now to the full episode format. So that's a big deal. I just can't believe it's December again already and how quickly these years go by. But I think this is one of the most pivotal years kind of in our company's history. We brought Transact and CBORD together, doubled the business, increased our scale, had to bring two cultures together. A lot of change for us, but all really positive forward momentum change. But yeah, one of those is I was named CTO of the new combined organization. I'd been leading product development and technology for the Transact business since 2019. I've been with the company, if you count acquisitions, going back to 2003. So I've definitely spent a lot of time in this space. And so I'm really just honored to be able to lead. We have incredible product people, product teams, and it's just a really fun position. And it's great to have so many incredible people and talent to help us kind of take our future forward.
Yeah, and I know what I've appreciated talking with you and your colleagues about is that Transact, in particular, with kind of its roots in higher ed, this sort of infrastructure for institutions and how they're sort of utilizing that and working with you all to navigate this moment of digital transformation. We're talking in sort of an interesting moment where you all have announced the kind of rebrand to Illumia and a new CEO. So if you want to just kind of give a brief mention of that, thoughts, reflections on this, just to kind of give it an honorable mention in our episode before we move on.
Look, we bring two big companies together like Transact and CBORD, and both those companies had really rich histories and very successful track records in the marketplace. We have more in common than not, but there's still, between the two companies, there's diversity. CBORD had a much bigger kind of healthcare business than we did. Transact had a payments business. When you really looked at our company names, Transact Campus, CBORD, you looked at the cultures of the companies, it was the appropriate time to pick a new name to kind of create a rally point for the employees, represent the full breadth of the combined business. And so we're pretty excited about it. Illumia, I think has a tone of kind of modernness to it and light and transparency. And I think the role we see for ourselves in the industry is we have a responsibility to provide thought leadership. So I think we'll have fun with that name. It's a big change. And what I've been telling my people, and by the way, and the employees did really feel strongly that we needed something to bring the two companies together to celebrate kind of our combined history. But a brand is kind of like a home. It's what you make it. When we look at the history of our business, I think what our customers care most about is the relationships with our people, the history of working together and solving problems together, and how well our products solve problems and help them serve their strategies and their users. We'll have to invest in the change. Like, change is never easy, but I'm excited about it. And then we have a new CEO coming on board too. So we're excited to have Greg join us in January. If you learn more about him, he's got an incredible background of providing transformational growth leadership. He's walking into a situation where we have so much momentum. So this is not a, hey, come in and let's fix a bunch of things. This is, hey, come in and let's keep the momentum going. Let's try to get our growth and our innovation to the next level. So I've had a chance to meet him. We hit it off really well. I think he's going to be a really great, steady leader. I think our clients and partners will like his style and his focus. The one challenge I do have is, Greg was a quarterback at Cal Poly, and I was a linebacker at Dartmouth. And kind of my mission in life for a long time was to hunt and sack quarterbacks. And so Greg and I are going to have to work through those dynamics. But no, we welcome aboard with open arms. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and it's good to hear, because I think my biggest takeaway is that kind of care and intentionality of announcing things well in advance, kind of anticipating the annual conference, the user summit for this new combined entity, and just like, because I think there have been, just for any sort of company, it just seems it's this kind of like arbitrary, abrupt, like change, rebrand, and it's just like, all right, this is us, this is us now, and deal with it. Certainly within higher ed, I would assume, healthcare to a similar extent, like, kind of what you're getting at. Like, it's just a very deep, like, relational business, these partnerships and everything. And so, like, you'd want to, like, be that obviously acknowledging, like, I'm still going to be here. Like, I'm, like, my business card will change and, there'll be some different branding and things like that. But, like, that idea of honoring the kind of steadiness and kind of keeping things going, and then the idea of keeping the momentum going, keep sort of growing, improving, and whatever else. So, like, that kind of difficult to balance. But I think half the battle is certainly giving people a lot of time to kind of process and understand and acclimate and normalize and those sort of things. Because I think with higher ed and just in recent memory, you've seen just now with like various like just ed tech companies where they're like entering bankruptcy or different things like that, where it's just like the idea of like these institutions are like small cities. They need to know that they can rely on their partners and that sort of thing. So I guess just all this is making me think of just sort of like these interesting moments where you see turbulence or whatever else. How do sort of like leaders kind of navigate it? And certainly in situations like this, like how do you sort of be a good partner as you're going through kind of a rebrand and something like that?
To react a little bit to that. So one, we're going to talk about modernization. And look, as a company, you need to kind of be willing to modernize and disrupt yourselves, right? And especially when you bring two companies together. And so there's a time and place to say, hey, there's an inflection point and we need to do something different. So you do have, look, there's risk in that, but there's also kind of boldness. If you never are willing to do that, how do you kind of keep the tension to get to the next level? One thing I should have mentioned, we involved our customers in this decision. So we did a lot of research with our partners and customers, and how do you think about our brands and what's important to you? And we had some trusted advisors that, we even looked at some of the names that we were considering. And that was a huge factor in the decision making, because quite frankly, a bunch of options were on the table, maybe even keeping, one of the existing names. But we do what we always do. We engage with our customers and get their feedback and opinions. And I think in terms of just messaging, we don't know any better way other than just to be transparent and say, this is what we're thinking. This is why we're doing what we're doing. We're open to feedback. And if somebody has a better idea, we're also willing to pivot if somebody can give us some information that we think, there's a better way to do it. So I think we've gotten very comfortable with, hey, you deserve to know, even if it's something that is maybe a hard message to deliver. If I would want to know it, if I was in their shoes, then I'm willing to share it, is the philosophy.
Yeah, that's something I appreciate about you all, as I've started to observe you all more closely and get to know sort of like who you are and what you do and everything, is like transparency piece, where I think it's that idea of like you kind of take it for granted until you see instances where like companies, organizations, whatever, are really not transparent. Yeah, I appreciate you kind of giving some context there, because yeah, it's definitely, always sort of a big moment to kind of give mention to and sort of honor all the sort of intentionality that's going into it. But what we're here to mainly focus on is the Higher Ed Innovation Index that you all put out, which is a really great resource to kind of capture this moment that is happening for institutions, navigating modernization, digital transformation, all that good stuff. So just briefly explain how this innovation index came together.
Given the scale that we have in the marketplace, our history, the diversity of products, and all the different touch points we have, I do believe that we as a company have a responsibility to provide thought leadership on the topics that are most relevant to the customers. There's a certain collective wisdom we have because we have so many conversations with different schools dealing with different challenges and problems. Every time we implement a product or solution, we're learning and getting smarter. And so we have all these signals that we get. And I think the markets we serve have really strong communities of their own. The schools share, they help each other. Honestly, it's one of the reasons I've spent my entire career in this space. It's a community approach to all this. We're in a position where we can do research and we can do surveys and we can do engagements to get data and benchmark information to help schools understand trends and the changing landscape. And so, we do things like this all the time, but I think this was a bigger initiative. And I think just with schools trying to work through their strategies of taking legacy on-prem systems, move them to the cloud, with all this emerging AI capability, it seemed like a good time to get some real data so people can use that data to help make decisions, prioritize, and then understand evolving relative to peers, right? And by the way, the information helps us too. We're constantly making decisions about where we should place bets and where we need to provide capability to help the industry move forward. And so the information, I think, is valuable to everyone in the supply chain.
There's definitely a lot of aspects there. On one hand, I'm sure a lot of people will feel like, oh, we're so behind in one area and another. And it could be reassuring that like, hey, like everybody else is sort of in the same boat. You sort of start to live in a more common foundation of truth, when you have like this sort of research of like, whether it's for student insights, what their sort of preferences are, or like, what are other peers doing in the space when it comes to these sort of issues and stuff. It's just super helpful.
Look, the job of a leader is to make things better. Keeping things the way they are and kind of maintaining, that's not leadership. Leadership is, hey, what's the next thing I can do to make things better, big or small? And I think data and inspiration from other people that are successful or doing interesting things is a great way to do it. And so I think, and by the way, a little healthy competition never hurt either. So, I think that's what's going in here. When I see leaders, they want to make things better, they want to make things easier, they want to make the resources go further, because when that happens, it's good for everybody, right? And so whatever we can do to help people be more successful, and at the core of our products, by the way, just our products themselves are designed to help the schools or the institutions we serve be more successful. It's to help them do that. I've always said one of the metrics for us is like, how many people do we get promoted? Like people that decide to put our products in place, implement them, and they help take their operations to the next level and help that person become more strategic, more important in their organization. If that's happening, then we know we're doing good work.
That is, I know there's some stuff in the report around like, are you realizing cost savings and how is that supporting you achieving your goals and that sort of thing? Another aspect that could be, an interesting metric is around just sort of like the implementation, the utilization, like how are people, kind of harnessing the potential of whatever kind of new tools they're implementing, how they're sort of building their tech stack. And one sort of takeaway that I was sort of sitting with is this phrasing kind of came up of like digital upskilling. So like just your perspective on like what that looks like in higher ed and who should own that agenda. Because I think, okay, institution X, Y, or Z, they're modernizing their tech stack. They're doing something. You obviously need to make sure that people know how to use it, harness it and everything. Is that the CTO and, his team's job? Do you think it's, some like L&D learning kind of people, HR, at an institution? Like, have you seen maybe that people have navigated this in a certain way and been successful to make sure people feel comfortable and confident with all the changes that are coming to all the digital tools and platforms that they're using it?
Change can be difficult, right? The pattern that I see is when people struggle, the difference between projects that really hit the mark and exceed expectation and projects that struggle, it's the foundation that you set at the beginning, right? And before you get into tech and the details, there's what is the vision? What are the tenets that we're going to use to make decisions? Because you're going to have to make a lot of decisions. I think spending the time really understanding what problem or problems are we solving and why are we doing it and what does success look like? Because when you get that foundation set up front, That's how you get people excited about the project. That's how you get people bought in. It's how you have a framework to say yes and no to things along the way to kind of make sure you keep focused. Because I think with any of these projects, there's the risk of boiling the ocean. So, you got to have hyper focus and get milestones along the way, because success is like a snowball that kind of builds on itself. It does take extra time to get that foundation. So it can feel like, I don't have the time to do this, we need to go faster. But the investment, getting that foundation, that buy-in set, it takes a little bit of time up front, but then it makes you go fast for over a longer arc of time. And so I do think it's really important that there are executive sponsors on a campus, whether it's the president or a business officer, where they say, hey, here's my vision, and this is what we're solving. Because really, at the end of the day, we should be solving for, how do we deliver better service to our customers, our end users? How do we take the user experience to the next level? How do we make sure that we're staying current and growing and staying competitive, which is good for everybody, right? If you can anchor in that, and one thing I would say is our company, we do think of ourselves as a trusted partner advisor, and we're very good at that. We can partner with our customers early in the process, because sometimes hearing it from an outsider and having other data sets or data sources, or hearing stories from other customers that have gone through a similar journey, that can help paint the picture that gets the leadership buy-in. I'll just give one little example that we do. I'll use University of Florida. They were looking at our mobile credential solution, but they weren't really sure, and it was kind of tough. Like, hey, were they going to? Because it's a big investment and endeavor for a campus. What we did is we actually took the main administrative building, and we set it up to work with our mobile credential solution, and we let the administrators and the leaders in that building actually use it for a month or two as a pilot. And then we said, okay, the pilot's over. We're going to turn this off now. You guys see. And they said, oh, no, we don't want you to turn off. This has been great. We love the experience. We want our whole campus to have it. And something that maybe would have ordinarily taken us a year or two to negotiate an agreement and get the funding for it, happened in months, just because they had experienced it firsthand. But that was just a different form of them. It just kind of solidified the vision for them of what was possible. So my advice to everybody is, spend the extra time getting the vision part right, getting the buy-in, I call it finding your conviction, because I find it just, when you get into the grind of it, it's kind of what gives you the power to kind of work through the challenges and the adversity.
I love that example and just the philosophy they're bringing, because I think, like the prototyping and piloting is always, it's effective for a lot of reasons, certainly in that sort of instance of like, maybe making kind of the adoption of the tool just really compelling for those leaders. And then similarly, kind of what you're saying, and imagine a similar thing could be like, okay, we're going to do sort of maybe a phased implementation of this. And you just start to get people sort of interfacing with the tool. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I want to really embrace it, and embrace with conviction. That's a great word. And I think, just what you're getting at too about like leadership. What does that mean? What does it look like? Coming from that executive sponsor, that leader saying like, this is why we're bringing it on. This is our vision for it. Because otherwise, you're like dropping stuff in people's laps, and then they're sort of just like diverging and using it in whatever way feels like it's kind of intuitive for them. And it could be that you're just not realizing the efficiency gains. You're not realizing the cost savings. You're not realizing, just better sort of like consolidation and cooperation and collaboration and all those words or whatever. But so I think that is like a really good way to just make sure that people are really embracing tools and know how to use them and why they're being asked to use them in that way. I think the conversation that comes up a lot with sort of digital transformation, implementing new tools, like, and what tools you're using and why, is that you have to balance operational efficiency or catering to, your faculty, staff, and others with student-centric design, like something that works really well for them on the front end. Like it could be like, oh, it works great on the back end for us to do all our administrative procedures, but it lacks on the front end, or vice versa. How do you see campuses successfully balancing those two things, and just like any advice on that idea of balancing operational efficiency with student-centric design?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all, but you got to kind of think, okay, how does the business work, and how do the bills get paid, and where does the money come from? What I think people should be concerned with is, hey, are we doing things that are sustainable over a long arc of time? When I think about students in particular on campus, they have higher expectations than ever before. They expect to be able to do things self-service. They expect to be able to do things through their phone. I think our entire culture now has a much more instant gratification orientation. We want to be able to solve problems quickly. We want it now. I have high school age students, and when we order stuff on Amazon, they're disgruntled when it's not delivered same day. And I think providing great user experience, one, it's fun when you get it right, but it's such a competitive differentiator for the institutions. And when you think about the amount of money that the people are spending to kind of have the university or college experience, I think you need to get that right. And by the way, that same philosophy, if you're talking about an administrative user or an operational user, really we should want to provide the same experience to them anyway. So it's really just about having a high bar in terms of, hey, if we're going to build software, and the whole idea of the software is to make life better or to simplify operations or let you do more with less, you have to be rooted in the user experience in that. And so I think that's just a DNA that you have to have as a company. One of the things that I take pride in, if you look at our mobile apps, they all have 4.8 star ratings and lots of reviews. That's very hard to do. And so that's an area where we as a company do not cut corners. We will spend the extra money to make sure the mobile apps are great, that the users have a good experience, that they're accessible, that they're designed. By the way, to do that, you have to be willing to validate your applications with real world users. And you have to come from a place of humility. Every time we have an app or a design that we think's amazing, the second we have a real user use it, we always do many iterations to get it to a point where the user, it doesn't matter if we love it, the users have to love it. But look, if I was an administrator at campus, that's an area where I would want to be really strong. I'd want to be winning. I'd want my mobile apps because that's going to be good for your career. Students care a lot about how tech savvy and innovative their campus are. They want to be proud of how their institution is using technology to do business. So, but I think another interesting thing in terms of balancing, I think, and we're going to get into this with like the challenge of transformation, and we even deal with this at our company, is colleges are complex cities, communities. And the question is, how do you balance making enterprise decisions? Here's things that we need to do the same or standards we need to do across the board versus giving an individual department or unit autonomy to do what they need to do to move fast and to do that. So there's arguments for both. And I think that is where the balancing act is, hey, what are the things that we need to do as an institution so we provide a certain level of experience to everybody? And what are the things that we can do to empower a business unit or department to do autonomously so they can also be fast and be agile and be entrepreneurial running their part of the campus. And so that's always an interesting dynamic to think about.
All right, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. Forsyth Technical Community College was juggling siloed systems, fragmented data pipelines, and manual workflows across marketing, admissions, and CRM operations. Then they deployed Bolt Agents, Element 451's AI workforce platform. The result? These agents handled over 80% of student inquiries independently, saving 183,060 human minutes, and cutting call volumes by 14% within just 1 week of rollout. Curious what your AI teammates could look like? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents. I think it's that idea of kind of what you're getting at of like they are dual mandates that thankfully I think we've gotten better at balancing as time has gone on, of like just getting better at getting user feedback and everything, and that idea that like that user could be a faculty or staff member or it could be a student, depending on what it is, but the idea that like those are equally important constituencies. And I mean, oftentimes I think it is where you would need to seek out a lot more user feedback from students or just be more conscious of the student-centric design piece. You just have to be really thoughtful about like, okay, well, that is like a super specialized use case for you, School of Business. Like, yeah, you need to have this different thing. But otherwise, like we do really need to have consistency. And that's how we're going to be able to be student-centric. Like just that idea of trying to kind of coalesce around what is it that's going to help enable good harmony between operational efficiency and student-centric design.
And I would connect this conversation back to the point we made earlier. Like that is the job of the leadership of the campus. Because if you have the vision and you have tenants, you use those to make these hard decisions. Like how far you go, which priority beats the other. But an example in this conversation we're having, if one of the tenets is, hey, we don't compromise on providing a great user experience to students, parents, you can even include faculty and staff in that. As people kind of have these debates and are arguing, hey, what should we do and how should we do it? If everybody can kind of go back to that tenet, that helps kind of anchor you and to make a decision that's aligned with what the vision of the leadership of the campus is, right? And that's why getting that foundation set and communicating it clearly, making sure people are bought into it is important, because at some point you have to trust all of these employees and all these leaders on your campus, because they're making decisions every day, and they need a framework to make the decisions in a way that's aligned with where you're trying to drive the campus strategy.
The idea of the secret might be of if you were advising a college on where to start, of the first domino that sets up the rest of digital transformation for success, I'm getting the impression, because you've brought it up a few times, that it's got to be clear vision from leadership. It may not be well, you just got to get this one tool and that's going to make everything easier. There may be an aspect of that, but I guess if you want to confirm or deny my suspicion, I guess, of that leadership would be the first domino to set up successful digital transformation. Or maybe is it something else? Is it a certain particular core tool?
Look, I would say that's where it starts, but let's just do a real world example. So when we talk about modernizing and kind of maybe, let's say, migrating a system from on-premise to the cloud, right? That's not something that you can do in your spare time. That's a major strategic initiative. In most cases, you're talking about probably a system that's mission critical, that's supporting 24-hour a day operations, 7 days a week. You might have well-established business process and procedures that have been in place for 10 years or longer. And so you're okay, now, because the exercise isn't just, hey, let's move it from here to here. When you do that, the way of working, and oftentimes there's new capabilities, new design, ways of working change. And so there also has to be kind of time spent saying, hey, is there an opportunity here to make the process better? Is there an opportunity to optimize? And that requires a willingness on people's part to think differently, to do things differently. So it's the human element of change, right? And so all of that is a lot of work for the people doing the work. There's risk. There's lots of impacts to other stakeholders on campus and your users. The leader has a couple jobs there. One is, hey, this is worth doing, and it's going to get us to this place that's better for everybody. And this is what success looks like, and this is why we're doing it. The leader has to clear the way so people actually have space and time to properly focus and execute at the right quality level. So you might have to deprioritize other things, or be okay that there's going to be some bumps in the road, or you might have to go a little bit backwards before you go forwards. But the leaders can provide, hey, I understand it's going to happen. I'm going to give you air cover for that. And then there's the re-engineering part, because the real magic is, hey, can you take a process that used to be complicated and make it simple? Can you take something that used to be 20 steps and make it 10 steps? How do we use this new technology to solve it in a different or more creative way? And you don't get any of that if you don't encourage your people to think that way and give them the time to do it. Because if you just say, hey, let's just move it from here to here and try to have this new system work exactly the way our old system or process did, and we're not going to take advantage of any of the new capabilities or innovations, you're missing out on an opportunity, and it's probably going to make the change harder anyway. So I think you just got to embrace, hey, this is a big strategic initiative. It's worth doing. We're all aligned on what success looks like, and we're going to make the investment. Some of my talking points here, it's not rooted just in my experience working with clients. We've gone through this ourselves. If you think about the history of Transact CBORD, all of our software was on-premise. And so over the last, I'll say 5 to 10 years, we've gone through our own modernization to move our products to the cloud, to redesign them and give them UX that's responsive and great on mobile devices. And so crawled through this glass ourselves. And some of the advice I'm giving here is advice that I've learned from failures and successes we've had doing that with our own technology that helps run our business and our products themselves.
I like how you kind of weave that together and kind of thread the needle of the leadership being really important to set the scenario for the first domino to fall. Those things combine are really a great recipe for success when it comes to digital transformation for institutions. And as we're winding down, If you could speak briefly, leveraging AI in higher ed operations, like anything you could speak to there, I guess, just to see that that's obviously like, I know it's like in the index and all that. So just wanted to make sure we got that included in the episode here, like in this conversation.
There's never been a better time in human history to invent, build, solve problems, automate. And it's not just AI. AI, I think, is going to be a huge part of this for a long time. But it's just incredible the tools and resources we have to do things in a better way. So that's kind of what gets me up in the morning. For AI, what we're focusing on and in our advice to the schools, I'd say there's two big categories. First, let's focus on what I call high toil, low joy work. Stuff that's hard, repetitive, tedious. And I think the win that I would go after first there is just take any employee in any department or office and say, hey, can we find ways to free up 5 to 10 hours a week of that person's time that they can do things that are more strategic, more fulfilling, have a bit more impact on the campus. I can give you some examples here in a second of things that might fall into that bucket. I think there's another bucket of things, which is this is work you should be doing, but maybe you're not for whatever reason. And if you could start doing this work, but doing it in a way that doesn't add anything to your existing plate, that's letting you do things you shouldn't. So I'll give you an example of that one. So take a campus card operation. Wouldn't it be nice if you had an agent that worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it was just looking at your data and it was looking for anomalies, high transaction amounts, unusual numbers of declines, duplicate transactions, different trends. And so when you come in the morning, you could look at a dashboard and it might say, hey, I've been maniacally working the last 24 hours and you're all green. Everything's kind of within expected tolerances and ranges. Or you come in and say, hey, there's an unusual number of declines over at this building. Or maybe you imported a bunch of new cardholders in and something's wrong with how they were imported in and there's much decline. So here's 2 or 3 things that look unusual that you should go investigate. I bet most people aren't doing that sort of observability on their data today. So that's in the bucket of something you should be doing. You don't have time to do it. If we could create an AI agent to do that for you, would that be valuable? In the first example of kind of the high toil, low joy, I'll look at our payments business as an example. For many of our campuses, we're processing a lot of payments every day, all the tuition payments, the e-commerce stores on campus, all the retail transactions. And there's a lot of detailed reconciliation that has to happen to make sure here's all the payments that processed, here's what kind of went through the gateway, here's what hit the bank account. And usually there's a person who's spending time every single day doing a detailed reconciliation and chasing down exceptions. Kind of the same thought process. I'm sure that AI loves data. And so that would be a perfect use case for an AI agent to be doing that. And I think that would be an example where I bet you could easily free up 5 to 10 hours of somebody's time. And so that's our focus, because I think the promise is that you can do more with less and that you can do more strategic work. And so there might be things that go beyond that, but our focus in the next 12 months is going to be helping our customers identify those types of opportunities. We're in an excellent position to build tools and agents to help with that.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving examples there of how AI can help create the efficiencies, the cost savings, that we were speaking to before, like relatively like simple, easy wins or something, like the idea that like kind of the formula there where it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, we could work on that and build that and see that being helpful.
Here, one more example, because this was funny. We had our regional user group conferences and we've invested a lot in our data analytics and our insights platform. And one of our solution engineers was doing a demo of the solution. It was amazing because they're pulling up data for the last 10 years, and here's your sales activity month over month and week over week, and here's your top sellers and your bottom sellers. But as he was talking, he was doing all this incredible analysis and then saying, well, here's my recommendation. You might want to promote this item more, you might want to remove this item, And I stopped his presentation and I said, isn't data analytics and insights, isn't this tool amazing? And everybody raised their hand and said yes. And I said, who has the time to do all the analysis that our solution engineer is doing here and the expertise? And everybody's like, no, I probably don't have time to do that. And I said, if we had the Matt Drummond AI agent that would look at your data, do all this analysis, do trending, and then provide you recommendations for considerations. I said, who would pay for that agent? And everybody's hand went up. So another way of thinking about agents is you can take a person that's super impressive and super productive and say, wow, if I could bottle what that person's doing and do more of it, and AI can do that for us. And so that's just another mental framework people can use to kind of say, hey, what's something that's worth doing?
Yeah, it's the idea of like, okay, this one card was declined 20 times in a row at a certain building yesterday. And it could just be like, okay, somebody was trying to get in there and couldn't, to manually go through the insurmountable amount of daily data points or whatever. And, or just obviously the status quo now would just be relying on a user throwing up a flag with a help desk ticket of being like, hey, I was trying to do a thing and it wasn't happening, and you'd be like, okay, I'll figure that out. But yeah, so I think some compelling use cases there. And I think as we wrap up, as we always do, I'd love for you to just kind of give your final thought, call to action to sort of synthesize everything we've talked about, the modernization, digital transformation that institutions are doing, grounded in that higher ed innovation index. Any final thoughts, call to action to wrap up the episode?
Yeah. So I would just say, look, the transformation's worth it, because when you get to these new models and these new places, your ability to innovate faster is it's increased by orders of magnitude. And so I think people have to make, even if it's a multi-year journey, you have to commit to doing it. I don't think it's a viable strategy to say we're going to stay where we are. And I also don't think you can ignore AI. I think it's here to stay, and it's only going to get more and more momentum. I think the key things we touched on are people need to really spend the time understanding current state and understanding what's good and bad about it and identifying the pain points, because that kind of is what ends up helping you drive, hey, what's worth reimagining and the process reengineering. And then I think you got to support your employees and understand this is complicated work. It takes time. You can't ask people to dabble in this. It's got to be focus and effort and a real investment, which might mean you have to do fewer things to really get to the other side. I think the partners you pick matter, right? And so I would make the case that where your partners can add value, in the case of our company, you want people that have experience, people that have scale. Every time we help a school or are involved, we learn and get smarter. We talked about that there's collective wisdom out there that your partners will have, that the community of schools can help each other. So you have to leverage that. And I think just everybody's got to be willing to invest in themselves personally to make sure you're continuously learning, that you're learning the capabilities of these tools and how you can use them to make yourself and your teams more productive. Because everybody I talk to, everybody's being asked to use technology to solve problems, to become more efficient. Hiring more people is usually not an option, or if it is, it's the last option. And so it's like, how can we use technology to force multiplier people, to help them do the most fulfilling work, and to create experiences, in the case of campuses, for students, faculty, and staff that exceed their expectations. That should be the aspiration and the goal. But it takes the leadership, the people doing the work, the partners, all working together, aligned to a vision to make that happen. And people are doing it all the time. So there are examples of a successful project, a successful company or peer, and don't be afraid to borrow their models for how they did it so that you just can apply it. What I love about our company is we are serving essential organizations, universities, colleges, hospitals, corporate enterprises, and we get to play with this technology every day. We get to try to innovate products, solve problems. And when you actually see it help an institution succeed, it's an absolute blast. So my son's a senior in high school. He's applying to college. I'm only allowing him to apply to colleges that use our software because I want him to have that experience when he goes there. And it's going to be a lot of fun for me to see my son using our products kind of every day, during his college experience.
I've been seeing just stuff out there, like students putting some value on like how kind of modern is sort of the digital experience of this institution and everything. And this is a big episode, but a necessary one. I appreciate you being willing to tackle all of these aspects of that higher ed innovation index that you all released recently, and just sharing all that you continue to do in this space and being great thought leaders and everything. So like I said, ways to connect with you and everything we talked about in the episode description, but just great talking with you.
Let's do it again soon, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.